Bob song.
Hey, my name is just Bob of the Petersburg Bob, where the Northern Railway Junction. I ride on the coal while those driving wheels roll, watch those engines sideways function. Jogga jogga jog jog, I'm a travelling dog and I like train riding. All the children love me, Bob, get away round every siding. Jogga jog jog, I'm a travelling dog and I like train riding. All the children love me, Bob, get away at every siding. Get away at every siding.
Hello, I'm Stu Nankerville of Blue Goanna Digital, here at the railway station on the South Australian North Line. The first train on this line was to Gawler in 1857. In subsequent years, the railway was extended northwards through Riverton, Farrells Flat, Burra, and reached Tarawi in 1880. It was a very busy railway, with passengers travelling to destinations such as Port Augusta, Broken Hill, Oodnadatta, and eventually to Alice Springs and Perth. The North trains now go a different way. There were some very famous persons who travelled over the North Line: the Duke of Gloucester, General Douglas MacArthur, and some notable explorers like Stuart. And of course, there was the melancholy return of Burke and Wills. On a happier note, we must add South Australia's most celebrated canine. Yes, Bob the Railway Dog, otherwise known as Railway Bob. We believe Bob was born early in 1884. He died in 1895. For most of that time, he rode the trains in the mainland eastern colonies of Australia. There have been other railroading dogs in the world, but none with adventures as many and as varied as those of our Bobs. Meet John Wilson, who is a railway historian.
In 2019, John wrote and published a history of Bob the Railway Dog. The book was entitled Bob's Railway and was subtitled Turbulent Political Times in South Australia and a Remarkable Railroad Dog.
John, I understand you have another book about Bob soon to go to the printer. Can you tell us a bit about the previous book and also a little bit about the next Bob book?
Thank you, Stu. When you've got a story as amazing as Bob's, it's the best story in the world. And so it's only natural that you want to share it with the rest of the world. Bob enjoyed a narrow window of opportunity. If Bob had been a dog at Petersburg in the 1870s, his travels would have been confined to the short distance of railway between Petersburg and Port Pirie. South Australia had developed 6 separate isolated railway systems in the 1870s, that were very good for getting the wheat to the port, but not very useful for travelling to and from the city. In the 1880s, there was a joining up of these railways. In 1886, the railway between Adelaide and Melbourne was completed, and this opened up a whole new world for Bob, who was able to travel into Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland.
So John, can you tell us a little about Bob's Railway?
The first part of my book examines this background. The Parliament of South Australia in the 1870s was of the deluded belief that it was capable of running a railway system. We only have to look at its legacy of the break of gauge to see the proof of that. In the mid-1880s it became clear that Parliament was not capable of running the railways and decided it needed an expert. That expert was Joseph Henry Smith, who was from the Great Western Railway in England. But Parliament couldn't keep its hands off the Railways Department and continued to meddle. There was a move within one of the unions to ban Bob from having free passage on the trains. But Bob had been adopted as the mascot of the Enginemen's Union. Mr. Smith had become quite attached to Bob and directed that Bob should stay, but there would not be another railway dog. The Attorney-General was Charles Cameron Kingston. Ultimately, Kingston and Smith became enemies. Richard Baker was the President of the Legislative Council and a supporter of Smith. Kingston became enraged and challenged Baker to a duel in Victoria Square. Smith's term of office expired in 1895, by which time Kingston was well established as Premier. Kingston made sure that Smith's term was not extended. Within a few weeks, Smith had departed South Australia and Bob was dead. In the second half of the book, I quote over 100 references from newspapers of the era or reports from people who knew Bob.
So John, you have now produced a second book about Bob. Can you tell us about this book?
It is a family production by Patricia and myself. It is a mix of fact and imagination. The cover of this book features artwork by Greg Judd depicting the Yankee in the paint shop. And it really did happen that on the 29th of May 1886 that a Yankee engine went out of control at the Islington workshops and demolished the paint shop.
Our story begins in September 1884. We meet Seth Ferry, who is a guard with the South Australian Railways and based at Petersburg, almost 150 miles north of Adelaide. He is working a special train with livestock vans. In those vans, not sheep, not cattle, not horses. Dogs. 200 dogs. Homeless hectares, rounded up on the streets of Adelaide and destined for the outback of Carrollton, where they will be pressed into service of rabbit eradication. Once the rabbits have been eradicated, the dogs will be, well, disposed of, is the word that the Vermin Board uses. They are the dregs of canine society. Except one, a youngster of a dog, perhaps a poodle cross or an English sheepdog. When the train arrives at Carrollton, Ferry asks the man in charge if he can buy the dog. The reply is a firm no. But if he can find a stray dog, then they can do a swap. Ferry has 24 hours. He goes to Port Augusta and finds a mutt. But his journey back to Carrollton is dogged. Indeed, a very apt descriptor. And he finds himself aboard a Kalamazoo with 36 miles to go, mostly uphill, and just 4 hours to do it. I will now hand you over to Rose Magor, who will read you an excerpt of Chapter 1 of The Amazing Adventures of Railway Bob.
I will shortly introduce Chapter 1. Subsequent chapters of the book tell how Bob was rescued from the mob of homeless hectares at Carrollton. Then Bob goes to Silverton and experiences a violent sandstorm that turns day into night. At Mentero, he meets the station master, who is an Irishman called Scotty. Scotty takes him off the express because the traffic manager, Pennywise Pendleton, is joining the express at Riverton and would not approve of a dog travelling without payment. Chapter 6, Bob rides an asthmatic old J-class engine to Islington, where he spies the Yankee engine. After the paint shop incident, Bob needs a good scrub. The railway to Bordertown is soon to be open, and the engine crew have to learn the road. They are the first engine to cross the Murray Bridge. Is it haunted? One of the stations along the line was called Cold and Wet. Here Bob meets Emmeline, who is a disabled girl who will steal your heart away. Bob returns to Quorn, where Mr. Thal, the locomotive superintendent, fits his special collar. There is a debate over where the apostrophe should go. Then they discover that there is no apostrophe.
So John, what is the significance of Bob's special collar and the apostrophe?
Thank you, Stu. Bob's collar had inscribed on it, "Stop me not, but let me jog, for I am Bob the driver's dog." SAR. Now the SAR was important because that was the South Australian Railways, because it allowed Bob to be official on the railway system. As for the apostrophe, there was no apostrophe in the set of letters at the Quorn workshops. There was a discussion as to whether the possessive S, that jingle, related to one driver or many drivers. Bob's collar is now held by the National Railway Museum, and the museum regards it as one of its most valuable artefacts. It was donated to the museum in about 1966 by the Enginemen's Union. Thank you, Stu.
Subsequent chapters, Bob rides a paddle steamer on the Murray and another on the Darling. He gets lost in Victoria and New South Wales. He gets to Broken Hill, where he discovers that there are no cats because they've been turned into pies. The last chapter takes us to the end of 1888.
We will now hear a recital of Chapter 1. Within the recital is a musical piece, Bob's Song. The music was composed by Glenn Haddon, who is a classical guitarist. He describes it as a type of Irish jig that he composed in the shower. John wrote the lyrics. The version you're about to hear has been arranged for a music box.
The part by Matthew Eyes, the engine man, is read by Noel Magor. Spencer Skipper was the reporter for the Adelaide newspaper, The Register, read by Stu Nankerville. The part by Alfie the fireman is by John Wilson. Alfie deserves some special mention as he writes verses that appear in most chapters. Here is an example. A sad fact about mines is that they boast of their worth as they plunder the treasures of our dear Mother Earth, focused on share price and a fat dividend, quite blind to the fact it must all come to an end. So they sink their shafts deeper and deeper and down, and the share price up spiralling, the talk of the town. But they know it must end with the burst of the bubble, When they find down the pit, they know they're in trouble. Coming up is a miner who has dug through from China.
The hero of our story is the four-legged Bob. And we open with Bob introducing himself and read by Patricia Wilson.
G'day, I'm Bob. Bob is short for just Bob, not Robert, Bobby or Rob. I'm a railway dog. There are watchdogs, guide dogs, hunting dogs, companion dogs, sniffer dogs. Being a railway dog, I'm a sort of a canine travel writer. I'm aboard the Morning Express on the North Line. I have taken my seat. We will only be going as far as Tarawi with this engine. I have been down in Adelaide for a few days. Came down from Tarawi with Matthew Eyes, our driver. I was pampered like royalty and got lots to eat. Matt's wife Jane gave me a wash. I still don't look like me, and the smell is not right. I don't want to seem ungrateful, but I can't wait to get into some coal dust. Matthew lives in Adelaide, but when he drives the express to Tarawa, he has a room that he shares with another driver called George Hiscock. He drives on the broad gauge. I like George. George says that Matt is the most famous driver in South Australia. My eyes are fixed on Matt in the cabin and Alfie too. Alfie is our fireman. Boy, are they busy. My fur is shaking with excitement and my nose is twitching. We are getting ready. Matt is so clever. I once heard George say that Matt is a musician and composes music and sings. I've seen Matt blow into an instrument that makes music, the sound sometimes reminding me of wind swirling through hollow logs out in the dry country. Alfie calls it a clarinet. Alfie and I know that Matt can also make music on something else. He is such an expert, and I bet no one else can do it. I hope Matt does it this trip. Matt has pulled his watch out of his pocket and checks it against the big clock on the station. It is 7:10 on the big clock up there, Matt says, leaning over to give me a head rub. Not long now, young Bob. And there it is, the guard's whistle. Matt has just released the air brake, and there is the last sss of air as he nudges the engine throttle. We are moving slowly. Then as we gather speed, we go over the maze of points and crossings in the station yard. Clickety-clack, clack, clack, crack, quick, tack, a grimble and clack. And the engine is talking to us. My ears hear music. Chuff, chuff, getting faster, signals all clear up the track. Today it's Tarawi and then I'll come back. I'm not in the carriage, and I'm not locked up in the dog box in the guard's van where dogs normally travel. This railway dog has the best seat on the express. It is on the heap of coal in the tender. I am king of the castle, and with the wind in my face I have a perfect lookout. I can see what Matt and Alfie are doing, and if I want to, I can move and ride on the footplate. No one has ever given me a ticket, first or second class. In fact, I have no ticket at all. A railway dog does not need a ticket. As we rush through stations, our engine picks up speed. North Adelaide, Ovingham, Islington, Dry Creek, Matt yells. The signs flash past. This is what the engine crews call the racetrack. It is not long before Alfie bursts into poetry. He is prone to this sort of activity. Some people call it doggerel, but I like it. Most words I don't understand, but I like the way Alfie says them. Matt tolerates these outbursts of Alfie's poetry. Sometimes he suggests a different rhyming word, or the whole new line. Matt says that some of Alfie's poems have a quality air about them. He calls it Alfie verse. The North Line Express is our job. There's driver Matt, me and our Bob. In the engine cab we're a smart team, making speed out of coal, smoke and steam. At Tarawi on time we should lob. I've heard both better and worse from you, Matt says, slapping Alfie on the shoulder. He does that sometimes. It means they are friends. I give a bark of approval. Meanwhile, we are whistling our way ever north. Woo-a-woo-a-loo-a-loo. There are many new words that a railway dog hears, and sometimes meanings only become clear with time. Matt talks of electricity and how he experiments with it, and does stage shows. I think that means to entertain people. He also takes pictures of people and places and things using a flashlight. This must be something new because he gets quite excited when he tells people about it. Matt is so clever. This railway dog is still trying to understand about electricity. I also had a problem understanding gauges, but I think I've got that worked out now.
I will now hand over to Matt.
Alfie and I would have to be the luckiest blokes on earth to have a mate like Bob. We talk to him as if he really understands, like a person would. Sometimes I know he does and could run rings around some people I know. Our Bob has a lot of know-how. At other times, all the technical jargon we use just seems to slip past his whiskers. Crews have to keep the many levers and instruments in the engine clean and polished. There is the pressure gauge. It is the fireman's job to keep the pressure a whisker under 130, which is the level he needs to have the engine running its best. There is also the water gauge and the Westinghouse gauge. Alfie and I work as a team, and Bob is part of our team. When Alfie wants a reaction from Bob, usually a whine, he'll say, "What steps would you take, Bob, if the safety valve became stuck and the pressure was 150? Bob has heard this question a few times, and each response, that is the whine, gets longer and louder. In my opinion, Bob could tell by Alfie's expression and urgency in his voice that we would all have to run faster than a dog chasing a hare at the races. The confusing thing about gauges is that there are railway gauges which have nothing in common with the gauges in the engine book. Alfie tried to teach Bob about railway gauges. That is the distance between the tracks. Bob had already worked out that he could jump over the narrow gauge track from a standing position, but not the broad gauge. That needed a running jump and a flying leap. When Alfie was trying to explain to Bob about the Sydney standard gauge, he scratched 2 lines in the dirt. At first Bob was real keen to help, sending red dirt flying. I reckon he soon lost interest when he realised Alfie wasn't looking for a bone. Narrow gauge drivers and broad gauge drivers meet at Tarawi. Halfway to Tarawi is Riverton.
We will now hear from Alfie the fireman.
Soon be at Riverton Railway Refreshment Rooms. Positively the best pies anywhere. Mrs. Potter and her refresh girls will have pots of tea and coffee ready. When the express reaches Riverton, Matt stands by the engine and talks to the passengers. Matt is immediately recognisable by his bushy eyebrows and his distinctive coat. There was one occasion when the express was behind schedule as the boiler tubes were leaking. Matt requisitioned some oatmeal from the kitchen and poured the oatmeal into the injector. That blocked the leaks and Matt was able to get the express into Adelaide on time. Matt learned to drive engines in England and maintains he saw the rocket in steam. George Hiscock thinks that is not true, but Matt is one to remind the rest of us in the cab. If it hadn't been for George Stephenson, you, my friends, would not be where you are right now.
The passengers in the front carriages are generally the first to the counter. Then some will come down to the engine for a look and a chat before the signalman rings the 3-minute bell. I get a certain pleasure from telling folks about the workings of the Westinghouse brake. One bloke, after inspecting a few wheels, remarked, "Well, I'm blessed, smooth, not like the old days when we stopped with a jolt. Remarkable, quite remarkable." If the passengers are all out interested and not just time wasters and nosy, I show them the air compressor on the side of the engine, singing its song, "Ka-ja-gump, ka-ja-gump, ka, psss, ka-ja-gump, ka-ja." My education session was interrupted by several barks. Bob was trotting towards the engine. A few paces behind him, a man seemed quite at ease to be following a dog who seemed in no doubt about where he was going. I wondered what this bloke had done to get Bob's attention. Our Bob doesn't easily take to anyone not smelling of oil or grease.
We will now hear from journalist Spencer Skipper. I could scarcely believe my luck when I came upon the railway dog known as Bob. He was clearly wary of strangers. I simply had to make his acquaintance. After considering all options, I decided to squat on the platform so my head would be level with the dog's. Across a distance of a few yards, I told him my name and purpose, keeping my words unrushed. "And I wish you good morning, Mr. Bob. I had previously only heard of you, and now I meet you in the flesh. It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance." What happened next startled me so much that I toppled backwards in a most undignified manner. Not only had Bob leapt towards me, but stood beside me, one paw firmly on my chest. He had what I can only describe as a lilting whine. What was he trying to convey to me with those mysterious dark eyes? He waited until I had dusted myself down, then nudged my knee. Was it a message? Then, turning away from me, he started down the platform. Then I knew. There was no way I could have kept pace with the dog, who, in spite of his large frame, was extremely fleet of foot. By the time I had reached the engine, Bob had leapt inside the cab and was barking in my direction. There was no doubt in my mind that I was being invited to join him. Having absolutely no intention of leaping into the cab, I remained a few moments watching the interaction between the dog and the fireman. Bob emitted several levels of barks and whines. I am certain I heard him sigh. I wondered if it was indeed possible for a man to understand canine language. "Hey, Bob, you've brought a friend," the fireman said, acknowledging my presence. "Any friend of Bob's is, well, you know how the saying goes. But I am curious how you were able to gain his trust." It must have been what I said, but could he understand when I addressed him as Mr. Bob? "To be sure," the fireman said, as he rubbed his sooty hands on an even more sooty rag. "Our Bob knows a gentleman when he sees one, and it is indeed a rare treat for Bob himself to be treated like one. Well, bless my soul, I must tell you, Mr. Fireman, the name's Alfie. Alfie, I am myself having a rare treat at this moment. Permit me to introduce myself," I said, taking a card from my breast pocket. "Spencer Skipper, a reporter from the Register newspaper. I'm on my way to Silverton to report on the Broken Hill mine." "That must be new. I haven't heard of that one before. There seems to be a new mine every week." "Funny name for a mine, Broken Hill," Alfie said. "And Bob hasn't heard of it either. See the way he cocks his head? A new word for him too." Alfie stared at my card, turning it around and over between his fingers. "A reporter, eh?" he said. "Well, Mr. Skipper, sir, maybe you could remember us in your reporting." Us being me and Bob and Matt talking down there to the passenger folk. "See, we're family. Not regular family kin, but railway family." "Bob is your dog?" I asked, as I glanced up at Bob, gazing down at us from the top of the coal. "Nah, although one could be excused for thinking so. He belongs to William Ferry, who is with the railways at Petersburg. He is commonly known as Seth. So, I am correct in assuming that the racehorse trainer, Seth Ferry, is a relative?" "His uncle. It seems one is into horses. The other dogs. Actually, only one dog. Hey, Bob." The dog gave a woof and Alfie a chuckle. All right, yes, I know, Alfie said. We've done this trip several times, Mr. Skipper, and Bob knows Ferry will be on the train from Petersburg and will meet us at Tarawi this afternoon. Then they will go home to Petersburg. I am staying at the Royal Hotel at Tarawi tonight, I said, watching Alfie move about the cab checking gauges. It would be interesting for sure if I could speak with Ferry about Bob. Reckon you be on the stagecoach for Silverton in the morning, so we will arrange it tonight. When we get to Borough, I'll have the station master wire Tarawi and let Ferry know. I was about to offer my thanks when Alfie leaned out the cab. Sorry, Mr. Skipper, there's the 3-minute bell. Make your way for Matt. Can't go nowhere without him.
I gave a soft whine when Skipper walked away from us. He seemed a good sort of bloke, and I know Alfie liked him too. The way he spoke to the non-railway man about my home was a dead giveaway. I am very happy to be already on my engine. The rush of people pouring out of the eating and drinking place is sometimes a little frightening, even for a travelling dog. They obviously do not want to be left behind, although I do not think Matt would ever do that. Although Alfie didn't say much after we left Riverton, the look on his face said his mind was definitely working on something. Sure enough, when Matt was cracking the throttle as we drifted into Mintero station, Alfie burst forth. Some men go stark crazy about holes in the ground, and script it on paper, they'll pay a good pound. But the ones that get rich from that silvery mine are the ones who sell them strong liquors and wine. Alfie was true to his word of Borough. Ferry would know about Mr. Skipper coming to Tarawi. Matt calls out station names as we approach them. Not many people at Mount Brian. A few children waved to me at Hallett. We are coming up to Uluru, then Yarkowie, and finally Tarawi. Humans could have found better names for those stations. Owie sounds like a dog in pain. After we leave Hallett, I jump down into the cab. I want to be under the whistle cord when Matt whistles, calling out, approaching Uluru. I have watched him work the whistle cord, which is strung across the roof of the cab. This is Matt's other special musical instrument. Sometimes he uses his little finger, and other times his pointing one. I hear different whistle calls depending on which finger he uses. Most humans could not tell the difference, but the ear of a railway dog can tell what station is coming next. My feet are restless and I can hear my claws scraping on metal. I wonder if Matt and Alfie can see my tail wagging. I am watching, ready. I have a surprise for them. Matt's pointing finger reaches for the cord. The moment he gives the first tug, I join in with my best melodious howl. Railway dog and engine whistle. Perfect timing. Although I did add one more loo-loo, just to make sure they heard me above the whistle and engine noises. I could tell Matt and Alfie were surprised when they spun round to stare at me. Their faces had fixed grins. Matt was even wriggling his eyebrows. Clever Bob, Matt said, giving me a head rub. What do you reckon, Alfie? A very clever dog? Can't find no fault with that. I give a short bark, which means I agree with Alfie. My paws tingle when I hear them laugh. We are such good mates. Good mates have jobs. So we all go back to ours. Alfie is watching the coal, Matt watching for animals straying across the track, and me on lookout duty watching for anything. I must have dozed off, because next sound I hear is Matt. 8 minutes to 12, Alfie, he says, then puts his watch back in his pocket. We'll be in on time. When we pull into Tarawi station, I give a few barks to make sure Ferry knows I'm there. We are all mates, but Ferry has a special place in this railway dog's heart.
Tarawi is as far as we can go with this engine. We would like to acknowledge that the photographic and sound files used in this sequence are from the State Library of South Australia, the Pitchy Ritchie Railway Preservation Society, and the National Railway Museum at Port Adelaide. We will now watch some more steam in the Flinders Ranges from John's 8mm movie camera, while we listen to an orchestral arrangement by Miho Nankervel of Glenn Haddon's composition of Bob's Song.
Wow, wow.